I'm Ben Gonzalez, and this is TDI. Well, today we're talking about the upcoming hurricane season and how it might compare to last year. And joining us today is the Warning Coordination Meteorologist, Paul Yura, from the National Weather Service's San Antonio area office. Welcome back, Paul.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Well, before we get going into the forecast, can you just remind viewers what makes a hurricane and what makes them so potentially dangerous for us?
Right. So, obviously, some of us are living on the coast. I particularly am not, but I live a little bit inland. But, for the most part, whenever you have clusters of thunderstorms kind of developing over the oceans, no matter if it's the Atlantic Ocean, Pacific, Indian Ocean, all the oceans in the world, sometimes during the season, when those storms cluster up, they'll start to have a very large scale spin. And that's what kind of develops into that tropical storm, maybe even a hurricane. And then obviously, as those kind of approach our land masses where everybody lives, that's where you have all the hazards that come into play. The wind and the storm surge and the rain and even possibly the tornadoes. So they're very large scale weather events, and they can, stretch over 1,000 miles and affect, a large chunk of the United States, within a given week or two.
And being over the water kind of gives them their energy. Is that correct, when they get that warm water feel?
Exactly, yeah. So think of it kind of as an engine where you need to have fuel for the engine. And typically the warm ocean waters, typically we say about 80 degrees or warmer, will kind of sustain a tropical sort of event like a hurricane or a tropical storm. So obviously as the oceans warm during the season, the more and more likelihood you will see tropical storms and hurricanes develop across an area.
Yeah, okay. That's why we have our season kind of in the warmer months then.
Exactly. So what's kind of odd about that is that you would think that the peak of hurricane season would be in July and August when the temperatures are the warmest. But actually water takes longer to heat up. So in fact, the hurricane season, the peak of hurricane season, typically the first or second week of September, is a little bit skewed from when the warmest temperatures actually are. And that's just because it takes longer for the oceans to warm up.
That's cool. So 2020 really seemed like a busy year, very strange year. I don't know if that was because of everything else that was going on, but we ran out of letters, started going to the Greek alphabet.
Yeah, it was one for the record books. It was we had 30 named storms last year. That was a record. The previous record was actually back in 2005 when we had 28 named storms. And yes, even back then, if you remember, we went to the Greek alphabet. So we had to go to the Greek alphabet again this year. And everybody learned their lessons. Believe it or not, we're never going to go back to the Greek alphabet. They're done with the Greek alphabet. It added just too much confusion to things. So actually what they have now, they've created a whole supplemental list of names that if we run through the standard list of names for the given year, they'll actually then have a backup list of names. So
you start
no
over.
More Eta, no more Zeta, no more of those Greek alphabets. Yeah.
I just gave up at that point.
I know, right?
It's 2020.
We had 30 named storms last year, and that was well above average. We had 5 landfalling systems just in Louisiana alone, and overall 12 landfalling systems in the United States. So, combination of the warm Atlantic waters. We still had a La Nina going on a little bit, and that sort of keeps down the upper level winds enough to where it allows the storms to have good exhaust and everything. So yeah, we had Laura, Eta, and Iota that were actually all retired. So you will never have a Hurricane Laura again. That was the one that hit Louisiana with really big storm surge around Lake Charles that really devastated the Lake Charles area.
Right. Well, are things kind of trending in that direction? Are we going to see more and more? Are storms becoming more frequent or stronger? Or is that just we're paying more attention to them? Right.
So interestingly enough, we've had 5 consecutive years now with above average hurricane activity in the Atlantic Ocean. Everything I'll be discussing is mainly the Atlantic Ocean and all the numbers and everything. In fact, I think 18 of the last 26 years have all been above average. So obviously we are seeing a trend. We are seeing a trend of more hurricanes, more tropical systems in the Atlantic. There's a couple of different reasons for that. One is that we're actually in a period of time right now, a very long period of time where we're having increased activity. And that kind of goes with the Atlantic Ocean and how warm it is. There's a fancy name to it. It's called the AMO, the Atlantic Multi-Decadal Oscillation, for all of you playing at home there.
That's why we get you here.
So the AMO has been in a warm phase, meaning the Atlantic Ocean has been warm the last 30 plus years. And so, yes, we've had a lot of hurricane activity over that time period. So as long as that sticks around, we're probably going to have above average sort of seasons. We don't know when it's going to go away. They tend to last about 20 or 50 years. So
50 years, wow.
Yeah. So at least as far as what we can tell with this sort of oscillation that we have. So that's obviously an issue. So as long as we're, it's kind of like with forecasting. If you keep having above average years, you pretty much keep forecasting above average years. That you're not going to go and buck the system and try to forecast something different like that. So that is going for increased numbers. And so we think that trend is going to continue. With the warm ocean and the atmosphere and everything else, I just don't see that really kind of stopping anytime soon.
Now, we had that crazy kind of winter, or at least the end of the winter, where we had that week of freezing. Is that play into the upcoming hurricane season at all? Does it tell us anything about that?
Yeah, I wish it would, to be honest. I wish you could kind of connect the dots between weather events. It would make my job a lot easier. But unfortunately, we can't. So there's no sort of relation of what kind of winter we had, a big winter storm, and what that kind of means into the realm of the tropical activity, several months from now. There's some broader scale circulations, like we talked about, the AMO, La Nina, El Nino patterns, which tend to maybe affect winter weather and then also maybe affect tropical weather. But it's really hard to tie those two together.
Okay, so it's not cooling off the Gulf at all because we had that week of freezing.
Correct. Yeah, we're actually right now, they're actually, the temperatures right along the tropical Atlantic is about average. So, you're okay, well, that's not bad. The problem is that the waters in the subtropical regions, so basically the higher latitudes, are still way above average. So overall, the Atlantic Ocean is still warmer than normal, and so that will tend to kind of increase our numbers a bit.
Right, and that's the potential energy that's out there.
Exactly.
So what is the forecast for 2021? Is it going to be another year like 2020, or do we not know?
Right, so the official forecast from NOAA actually won't come out until the mid toward the latter part of May. So we don't know exactly what my parent agency NOAA is going to say. I will say, because of everything I've talked about already, and there's one group out of Colorado State that tends to put out a really well-received hurricane forecast every year as well. They've already put out their forecast. And so their numbers, around 17 named storms is what they're kind of expecting, and 8 hurricanes and 4 majors. Just to let you know, the 30-year average that we have is basically 14 named storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 majors. So I would say around average or slightly above average is what that one group at Colorado State is forecasting right now. And we'll have to wait to see what NOAA says, but most likely it's going to be around that, average or slightly above average sort of numbers.
So we're talking about 17 named storms. Is that what you said?
Yeah, that's what Colorado State is forecasting right now, yes.
What does that tell the person on the street, our viewers? Is there something they should take from those predictions?
Yeah, for the most part, Joe Public, walking on the street is not going to care. I'll be honest, right? He's not going to care what the seasonal average is. I would say for the folks that live on the coast, they probably pay a little bit of attention to the numbers, but we've had plenty of examples in the past, and this, of a very, low named storm year, right, where we only have maybe 5 or 6 named storms, but one of them is a Cat 5, or one of them is a massive hurricane that impacts a certain coastal community. So, everybody should be preparing the same way every year, which is more than last season, right? You make sure you have your evacuation kits. You make sure you know where you're going to be going. You make sure you have, your cell phone apps and everything that comes into being well prepared for a hurricane season is kind of what a person should that's how they use this information. It's a reminder, right? It's a reminder that hurricane season is coming. It doesn't really matter how many numbers are out there because, all those 17 named storms could be in the middle of the Atlantic and not affect the U.S. at all. Whereas 10 of them maybe could, right? And 10 of them make landfall in Texas. I hope not. Let's hope
right.
Texas is spared again this year. We had 2 minor storms kind of last year, Hannah and then Beta, that one was a hurricane, Hannah was a hurricane, but overall our impacts to Texas were much lower. And obviously we needed a break from Harvey. So
Right. So it really depends. It's not the total number of storms out there. It's where they're going. It's which ones and where they're going.
Yeah, and how people prepare, right? And how people prepare.
Yeah.
We're still dealing with COVID right now, so the whole evacuation issue is still kind of up in the air of how do you evacuate people while keeping social distancing, busing folks from the coast into regions that have different COVID protocols. There is a bunch of logistics that the state is trying to work out right now. And so let's hope we can at least get the COVID behind us to make it more into the normal sort of how do you evacuate a community if a hurricane is coming. Because right now they're dealing with multiple disasters at the same time, and trying to juggle that is very hard logistically when you're trying to deal with people that have COVID, have not had COVID, that have been tested, not been tested, and how do you evacuate those people and keep them safe?
Right. Well, you mentioned doing a little bit more than we did last year as far as preparations. Is there somewhere you could point people to look for some advice on preparation?
Yeah, of course, the FEMA app is great, and the FEMA websites are wonderful. They talk about not only preparing for hurricane season, but obviously things like flood insurance, things that we need to discuss when it comes to especially those folks in flood-prone areas along the coast for storm surge. One thing, too, that I really want to remind people is that, the storm surge and the tornadoes and the rainfall get a lot of the press when it comes to the big dangers and hazards of hurricanes. But we actually, like last year, the few people that we lost in Texas during the hurricane season were actually because of rip currents. So the beach hazards before and after the tropical systems come through. And then also people improperly running generators, which we also obviously saw during the winter event. So, get a little bit of basic knowledge of, how do you run that generator, not too close to the house. You can't put it in the garage, all that because of carbon monoxide poisoning. But then also, you could have a beautiful day on the beach with big waves coming in from a hurricane 1,000 miles away, and we have people that lose their lives because of rip currents. So you just have the overall understanding of the different hazards that we have. And even on a really, really pretty day, you could run into some of those hazards on the beach.
Right. You kind of have to respect those natural forces that you may not see every day because they create a different set of circumstances.
Right.
Well, thanks, Paul. I really appreciate this. It's always fascinating to talk to you. For our advice here at TDI is to, before hurricane season, take some time and kind of review your insurance coverage. Like Paul said, consider flood policies. That's a big deal here in Texas. So much of the damage from Harvey was flood, and that's just not covered by your regular home insurance. And then also make a home inventory. You hope to never have to make a home insurance claim, but if you have that inventory, it'll make it a lot easier to go through your property and what's missing or damaged. And then check out our website for more insurance tips. It's tdi.texas.gov. Or if you have a specific question, you can always call the helpline. That's 800-252-3439. So for Paul Ura, I'm Ben Gonzalez. This is TDI.